But you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle,
right?
And I saw it, and it was. But I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at.
Diddy''Combs isn't just a titan in the music industry. He's also seen as a mentor. The Grammy-winning rapper has taken several artists under his wing at a very young age, who later rocketed to stardom. But as he sits behind bars, those relationships are being scrutinized. And we're going to take a closer look at one particular connection. Usher. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Yeah, so let's talk about Usher, because that is the name that he's known by worldwide. But he was born Usher Raymond IV in Dallas, Texas, back in 1978. The family moved to Atlanta, Georgia when Usher was a teenager. And you might recall this. He appeared on the televised talent show Star Search when he was 13 years old. Fun fact about that, he actually set the record for the longest note ever held by a child on Star Search, 12 seconds. So what happened? That got the attention of famed producer L.A. Reid. But according to his coaches, reportedly during puberty, when Usher's voice started to change, he kind of had trouble controlling his vocals. Now, L.A. Reid reportedly considered dropping Usher from his label, but when Usher begged him to stay on, Reid sent him to live with Sean Combs in New York for a year to train. And at the time, Combs, who was then known as Puff Daddy, we believe was in his 20s, there were these apparent training sessions. And these training sessions were known as Puffy Flavor Camp. Now, through the years, Usher has spoken about this time in his life with Combs. For example, in 2004, Usher told Rolling Stone that Combs introduced him to essentially sex. He said, quote, "Sex is so hot in the industry, man. There was always girls around. You'd open a door and see somebody doing it or several people in a room having an orgy. You never knew what was going to happen." On the Howard Stern show in 2016, Usher talked about his time with Combs too, saying there was definitely a lot of wild partying, but he doesn't think he was really able to understand what all was going on. And when Howard Stern asked him, would you send your own kids to something like Puffy Flavor Camp, this is what he had to say.
What a life.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
14 years old. You're a dad now. Would you ever send your kid to Puffy Camp?
Hell no.
See? Usher also spoke with People magazine back in February, saying some of the most valuable lessons I could ever learn as an entrepreneur were picked up when I spent that time in New York with him. This unwavering desire to create and make certain that your creative ideas are executed. I saw him in real time working it out, him building something from nothing, him understanding how culture and collaboration can build careers. Being able to see that, that's what I got. Now remember, Usher was 13 to 14 years old at the time. Combs reportedly had legal guardianship over Usher during that period. Can't confirm that for sure. And since his time with Combs, Usher has worked with several other producers and record labels, and he's become one of the top-selling R&B artists of all time. His awards and nominations are almost too many to count. He's won 8 Grammy Awards, 18 Billboard Music Awards. He's been inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame, star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Rolling Stone magazine recently named the album Confessions Part 2 as the #1 greatest R&B song of the 21st century. The magazine also ranked the song's music video among its 30 sexiest music videos of all time. And VH1 wrote that he was the best dancer in pop since Michael Jackson. And of course, Usher recently performed last year at the Super Bowl halftime show. So he's not just any musical artist. He is a superstar who, you got to say, his success has been at least partially attributed to his time spent with Sean Combs. The two have been photographed together at different events throughout the years. You can see that connection. But having said that, Usher has been quite silent on his former mentor's very public arrest and indictment. Combs was arrested on September 16th after a Southern District of New York grand jury indicted him on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. The indictment reads, the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The allegations come after Combs' mansions in Miami and Los Angeles were raided by federal agents. Multiple victims, both men and women, have filed sexual assault, sexual harassment, sex trafficking lawsuits against Combs. One of the allegations is that he forced individuals to take drugs and participate in sexual performances known as freak-offs and to keep quiet about all of this. Now, Combs and his attorneys have denied that he did anything wrong, but thanks to allegations of witness tampering and fear he might flee, 2 different judges denied him bail. He's being locked up right now in the Metropolitan Detention Center out in Brooklyn. Hey, by the way, thank you so much for coming to us for our Sean Combs coverage. We really, really appreciate it. We don't take it lightly. You're trusting us, and we're going to continue to keep bringing you these updates and analysis. But one of the reasons that we're able to do this is because of the support that we get from our incredible sponsors. And I want to call out one for you right now, a great partner of ours, our partner who has done our YouTube takeover for the day, Morgan & Morgan. Look, if you should get injured, you need to know your rights and whether you can be compensated. And this firm, America's largest injury law firm with over 1,000 attorneys, may be who you want in your corner. They have quite an impressive track record. I mean, over the past several months, they've won verdicts, $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, $6.8 million in New York, and all of these, mind you, considerably higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. And even if your case isn't worth 7 figures, why not start a claim and get the money you deserve? The whole process, so simple, can be done straight from your smartphone. Their fee is absolutely free unless you win. They only get paid if you get paid. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. Now, to be clear, going back to Usher, he is not mentioned in this criminal indictment against Combs, okay? I want to be very clear about that. And he has not been accused of wrongdoing by authorities in any way. Having said that, many people are wondering what he might have seen at a young age when he lived with Combs in the 90s. This is a very common topic of conversation right now. Deep dives into the people surrounding Combs. Justin Bieber, Jennifer Lopez, Usher, so forth. What do they know? Will they be a part of any kind of case? Now, days before Combs was arrested, another of his apparent mentees filed a civil action against him, Dawn Richard. Dawn Richard is a former member of the girl group Danity Kane, and then she joined a trio group with Combs and another singer, Kalina Harper. It was called Diddy Dirty Money. She filed a lawsuit claiming that Combs sexually and verbally abused her for a decade. She also claimed that Combs owes her more than $3 million in unpaid salary and royalties, as well as unpaid wages for touring. And going back to Usher, Richard claims that Usher witnessed Combs' alleged abuse of his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. Ventura had filed her own bombshell lawsuit last fall, seemingly kickstarting Combs' significant legal troubles. In the complaint, Richard's attorneys write, in the weeks and months leading up to the Bad Boy Interscope deal, Mr. Combs had frequent meetings with producer and then CEO of Interscope Records, Jimmy Iovine. On one such occasion, Combs hosted a dinner at a West Hollywood, California restaurant, which Miss Richard and Miss Harper were requested to attend. Among the guests at the dinner were celebrities like Neo and Usher, as well as Mr. Iovine. At the dinner, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had an argument. In front of the dinner guests, Mr. Combs hissed at Miss Ventura in a screaming whisper and forcefully punched her in the stomach, causing her to double over in visible pain, crying. Miss Clark escorted Miss Ventura out of the restaurant, and Mr. Combs remained and continued socializing with the dinner guests. At this point, Interscope Records clearly had actual knowledge that Combs was dangerous around females and that Combs was willing to brazenly batter a female in public. Erica Wolf, one of Combs' attorneys, responded to the Richards lawsuit with this statement to Vibe. Mr. Combs is shocked and disappointed by this lawsuit. In an attempt to rewrite history, Dawn Richard has now manufactured a series of false claims, all in the hopes of trying to get a payday conveniently timed to coincide with her album release and press tour. So let's go back to Usher. There was speculation around him, and that increased dramatically when all of the singer's tweets suddenly disappeared on the day before Combs was arrested in New York. There were rumors that Usher might be trying to cover up any past mentions of Combs on his feed, but Usher later tweeted, or wrote on X, "Account got hacked and damn, y'all ran with it," followed by 3 laughing emojis. His tweets also seem to be restored on his feed. Now, Usher is not the only up-and-coming superstar that got special attention from Combs. There was a video posted to Justin Bieber's YouTube page when the singer was just 15. It's gone viral again after the latest allegations against Combs.
Justin, you ever seen the movie 48 Hours? Right now, he's having 48 hours with Diddy, him and his boy. They're having the times of their lives, like you know, where we hanging out and what we doing. We can't really disclose, but it's definitely a 15-year-old's dream.
Now, Usher was actually the one to introduce Bieber to the world of Combs and Bad Boy Entertainment. Usher told Howard Stern that he'd heard about Bieber through the grapevine, he'd seen some of his YouTube videos, and had his people set up a meeting. And that led Usher to oversee Bieber's debut album, My World. Now, most recently, Suge Knight, the rival of Sean Combs, music executive who's currently sitting in prison after pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter after running over a man, he spoke in a bombshell interview with Chris Cuomo on News Nation, and one of the things he alleged was that music executives had used alcohol and drugs to compromise Combs' manhood. He told Cuomo that Combs was taught that, and he got Usher as a kid, alcohol, drugs, sex, Justin Bieber, and see, they do these things to take control. Okay, so what are we supposed to do with all of this? Well, let me bring in right now civil rights attorney Joe Richardson to help break this down. Joe, so good to see you. Thank you for coming on. When I mention this, any possible connection with Usher here, anything legally speaking that sticks out to you?
It's not necessarily clear that there is, which Usher can continue to hope for in that regard. However, because they get to cast such a wide net in charging him, they're charging Puff Daddy with a conspiracy. And so as part of that, they can use things that they didn't prosecute because they ran out of time. They didn't prosecute for any of a number of reasons. They can put them all in together and mix them all up, and that gives you your conspiracy. So if Usher witnessed things, and they could go back 20 years, they could go back a long time. If he witnessed things, if he was part of things, all of that can potentially be admissible. And so I see why there was this reaction either by him or his hacker to get rid of some information.
Oh, you don't believe it?
Twitter.
You don't believe it?
I don't have to figure that out one way or the other, but the irony is crazy. You know what I mean? His hacker's got good timing. Let me just put it to you that way. He's not the one he wasn't named in the indictment, et cetera.
Right.
But by the way, nobody else was named in the indictment, but it is a conspiracy. And that normally means with or together and others. So he's not totally safe just because of how broad the potential is for things that can go into helping to convict Puff Daddy.
I still am confused why, if let's say there was no hacker, let's say he intentionally did it or one of his team members did it, what would be the goal there to delete the tweets? Is it to delete it so from a PR point of view, nobody can dredge up old tweets? Oh, look how he's praising Sean Combs right here. Because from a legal point of view, if you delete potential, I don't know if you want to call that evidence or not, that could get him into shaky territory.
And that's true. But sometimes you're not even thinking about whether you're going to be potentially legally wrong. I think that handlers and people that are around artists, and remember, Usher is one of the biggest acts in the world, not just R&B act. And so it would be very easy for somebody on his team to quickly overthink a situation and to be corrected by counsel saying, no, we don't want to do that. And here's why. Because there's so many people probably that rely on him for their livelihood, so many people on his team, and they're very protective about his image. They don't want anything about sex going on or being talked about off stage. He's super sexy, super sensual on stage as part of his act, but that's as part of his act. They don't want to be dealing with situations that lend to criminal liability. So someone over there could have jumped the gun. You couldn't put it past him. And if that had happened, he wouldn't exactly be admitting it right now.
If you witness something, so one of the allegations, as I mentioned before from Dawn Richards, that he witnessed Combs beating Cassandra Ventura, who I think we can make a fair argument is probably a key figure in this indictment. A lot of her allegations are echoed in this indictment, also the government's subsequent letters to the court. If you witness that, not saying you participate in these freak-offs, not saying you're forcing people to go be a part of the freak-offs or anything like that, but you witness an act of violence, which is a characteristic of the overall racketeering case, a characteristic of the sex trafficking charge. Does that make you an accomplice? Does that make you a co-conspirator from a criminal point of view?
Not necessarily. I think it's a lot harder to connect someone and make them a co-conspirator, particularly somebody like Puff Daddy that's not necessarily somebody like Usher that's not around Puff Daddy day to day and things like that. Now, there's plenty of room for other co-conspirators, but I'd be just as worried if I am people around his universe, the record companies, et cetera, as it pertains to the civil lawsuits, because depending on who you're naming, if you're adding companies, if you're adding other individuals, you can impute knowledge based on the things that everyone saw. So you got to remember, there's not just what's going on the criminal side. There's this dozen or so civil cases that are going on where they can press buttons and connect dots. And they can also, just like they do on the criminal side, the prosecutors do on the criminal side, that the attorneys can do on the civil side to press and get pressure on particular individuals to help make sure that they render or get from Puff Daddy what they're looking for from a civil standpoint.
Do you think that he hasn't said anything since the indictment and the arrest? And actually, that's common with a lot of the people around Combs' orbit, a lot of high-profile people. Do you think they're not saying anything because they don't want to get wrapped up in it? They don't want to say something that could hurt them? Or are they already speaking with federal prosecutors and investigators, or they anticipate they might?
There could be some of both. I would say that, if I really thought, if I'm Usher, if I'm whoever else, fill in the blank, and I really thought that I was potentially part of this or could be seen as such, now I'm talking with my lawyers about, should they be calling us before we call them? What do we do with that? Are we jumping the gun? Because some people, I don't know that any other big profile star is going to go to jail here, but someone could lose their career. Someone could be negatively affected. Maybe Usher's a little bit too big for that, maybe so, but there's a whole lot of people out here that participated in these things and that talk about these things. They talk about the freak offs, and they might talk about them in different ways, but everybody understood that Puffy could put on a party and that all kinds of stuff went on. Entertainment, 2.1. In other words, you always hear things about big entertainment parties and sex and all of these other things. But some people are thinking hard about, are we potentially liable here? And does that mean that we ought to be part of this thing at all? And are we worse off if the prosecutors call us before we call them?
And to be clear, there's a difference between a wild party and a freak off, which allegedly was a coerced, drug-fueled encounter. One more point I want to get to before I have to sign you off, Joe. You mentioned they can go back and talk about what Usher experienced as a young kid. Look, Combs, 2 points to this. Combs is not charged with anything with respect to underage people, with minors. Even though there were allegations in civil lawsuits, even though there's been rumors out there. But when you talk about young performers like a Justin Bieber and an Usher, people start wondering, could he be hit with a superseding indictment that is in relation to minors, which would make his defense incredibly difficult, right? There's one thing you could say, maybe it was consensual, these encounters, no one was being forced to do anything, but when you deal with minors, the game changes. Do you think that is a fair conversation to have about a superseding indictment when he seemed to be around young people? It could be absolutely nothing. There might not be any evidence of that whatsoever. But now that he has been criminally charged, now that we are talking about people from his past, do you think that is a fair question to ask?
I don't know whether or not it's a fair question, but it's a real question, right? It's amazing that so many young people, underage folks, seem to have something to say about things that they witnessed when they were around Puff Daddy. And so that might mean a real thing. And I don't know. The prosecutors seem to be very confident about what they actually brought. I think that their case really runs, even though they have a lot to allege, and they're alleging a lot over a lot of years with a lot of people. I think their case flows from Cassie. And we can do a separate sidebar podcast about how crazy Puffy was to allow Cassie to not get settled out before she issued this lawsuit, because that not only created the floodgates for other civil lawsuits, but that also allowed for this criminal case to basically be written out. But it seems like to the good for Usher, for Usher too, but for Puffy, that this seems to flow from Cassie. There's a lot of things going on around her, but she seems to be the center. That's dealing with her as an adult, et cetera. So my sense is they have plenty to deal with, dealing with people that were adults that were nonetheless coerced, nonetheless were perhaps traveled, transported for prostitution, et cetera. So my sense is that's where they start from, but that doesn't mean there aren't other things out there. They still have to make choices about where do we want to lie in terms of what do we want to convict, who are our strongest witnesses, those types of things. And for now, they seem to have arrived on the adult side of things. And that's probably good news for Puff Daddy.
Civil rights attorney Joe Richardson, thank you so much for coming on, breaking it down for us. I look forward to seeing you again, my friend.
You as well. Take care, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.